There's no right way to build out a van. The van I planned out so carefully in spreadsheets. My job I realized I could do from anywhere. So I prioritized having lots of solar on top. Hi, I'm Meg. This is Dinah. That's Olive, and this is our van Goldie. We've been on the road for 2 years. Come take a tour. Welcome to the kitchen. The kitchen starts out with a sink. It's got an RV water pump on it, so I have running water, both hot and cold. The hand sprayer also works. Next to the sink is my stove, so this pops off. I've got a 3-burner range and also an oven. This is a Furrion RV oven. And then the refrigerator is over here. In terms of food storage and pantry, there is a cupboard down here. It is built over the wheel well, so the stove kind of sits on the wheel well with as much storage as I can fit in the cupboard there. And then likewise, the refrigerator is on top of the wheel well as well. I have a Propex propane furnace. It's mounted underneath the van, and the air blows in here, so it all exhausts outside of the van. The propane is also running the range, the oven, and then the hot water heater as well. So those 3 appliances. The water storage is all underneath the bed in the garage. I've got a 28-gallon freshwater tank, and then I also carry just one of those 5-6-gallon blue jugs to have for extra water. I don't have any sort of monitor on my water tank, so I never know when I'm going to run out unless I'm going in back and actually looking at the water level. A nice thing about the water tank that I did is it has both a gravity fill, so I can drop a hose in from the top, and also a hose hookup. So I can take the hose that's already attached, has an RV filter on it, and hook that up to a spigot somewhere. So I'm able to fill either way. And what's been really helpful with that is when I can't find a spigot to hook up to, I can use my blue jug that's got just 5 gallons I can carry. I have a little portable hand water pump, so I can fill that up and then pump that into my main tank in order to have running water here. In terms of a kitchen, I think about, functional requirements, and that really is the theme of my entire build is what do you need to function? What are your personal requirements? And for me that, was I wanted to have a full-blown home on the road. I didn't want to feel like I was camping and having to get out my jet boil or cook outside or slide the stove away when I wasn't using it. I wanted to feel like I was in a home, just a really, really small home. The van I planned out so carefully in spreadsheets. Even the floor plan, I set spreadsheet cells to 1 by 1 and mapped out every single inch of the van. And I knew kind of what I wanted to have on the road and about how much space it would take. And so I measured the space that I had and then more or less cut every piece to fit. The thing about these Econolines is they're kind of shaped like submarines. They're really, really round, and that's a big building challenge. I wanted it to be handmade and beautiful looking for me. Now, a professional van, something that actually looks like a home on the inside, wasn't in my budget, and I didn't need that. I don't require that kind of finishing, so just something that I could be proud of. So the drawers are actually pretty great because they're handmade with just plywood, put together, which means they fit a little bit tight, and it takes a little bit of a yank to get them open, to get them to close. They don't open when I drive, and I don't have any sort of fancy closure or lock or anything. They just kind of stay because there's enough friction, because I built them by hand. I am not a carpenter. So the kind of, not great way they fit together is actually a really big perk of the van. And so this area here, we've got the refrigerator, and then this functions as my dresser. So cutlery is in just this one drawer, and then everything else ends up being clothing. And down here, these cupboard doors open out. I find the pack sacks enormously helpful for keeping clothing organized. And on the Econoline, the gas tank fill is kind of right here. So there's not a wheel well, but there's another really big bump in the dresser here that I didn't have to deal with by just making that open storage space to kind of pack things in. In terms of the decor, when I lived in the city and was housed, I had about 100 houseplants, and I had to rehome all of those before I hit the road, which was a trick. But to me, having plants is really part of making a place feel cozy, making it feel like home. And so through trial and error the last couple of years, I found some plants that do really, really well in the van for me. And then the bars that you see down here in the window, that's just an iron bar that I have screwed into my countertop. And I do that so that way I can do magnets on the bottom of everything and things stay in place when I drive. I am not someone who wants to do a lot of battening and securing before I drive, and so I've tried to make everything as secure as it can be without needing any extra attention from me. So if I lock my fridge, lock the stovetop, that's all I really have to do to be ready to drive the van, which is really, really nice because everything else is just kind of magneted in and doesn't really move around much. Unless I'm on some sort of like sketchy road that I probably shouldn't be on anyway, in which case things are going to fly, but that's on me. So back in 2019, 2020, I was getting divorced. I'd been with my partner for 15 years and lived in Boston for all of it. And so my life was going through a really, really big change. And then the pandemic hit, and I had been working full-time for a 3D printing startup. I had been in the office every day. I got that job in 2017, so I had been doing that job for a few years. And in 2020, I was wrapping up a divorce, and suddenly the workforce started working from home full-time. And doing that, I realized that I could do my job remotely. I didn't need to be in an office. I didn't need to be face-to-face with the people I was interacting with. And that coincided with this huge life change where I was single and I didn't have any family or reason to stay in Boston other than my job. And my job I realized I could do from anywhere. And so I decided to find a new place to live. And that was happening and going through my mind at about the same time that I met my first Vanlifer. I didn't know people lived in vans until about March of 2020. I didn't know that being nomadic was something that people did. It wasn't part of my experience. I wasn't aware of it. And I met my first van lifer and just absolutely fell in love with the idea of having a home that you could take with you, that could be anywhere. And the idea of this like really drastic minimalism where you only had what you can carry. This is kind of the control center of the van, starting with the solar. Everything is on the Renogy system. Up top, I have 5 100-watt panels. So I've got 500 watts of solar. It takes up pretty much the entire roof. And those come down to charge 300 amp hour batteries. They're all lithium, so 300 amp hours of lithium. I have a ton of power. And that was one of my priorities when I was doing my build, was not having to worry about running out of power while I was working. My day job is super important to me, so knowing that I would be able to power the laptop and the internet and everything else and what have you was an absolute requirement for me. So I prioritized having lots of solar on top. Also over here, this is the control for the Propex heater. It's got the thermostat, so I just set the temperature and forget it. It'll click on when it drops below that temperature. It'll turn off when it reaches the right temperature. And then there's a charging station over here. These are made for boats. They have USB sockets, 12-volt sockets, and then a handful of fused rocker switches. And I'm really proud of that on my build. Pretty much every electronic that you see, everything that takes power, I have on a rocker switch. So, for example, the Propex heater is just on a switch right here. In the troubleshooting instructions on this thing, sometimes they'll say, get to the fuse, pull the fuse out to kill the power, and then put the fuse back in. And that can be a really big pain depending on where you've mounted your heater and like where the fuse is. But in my case, I can just click on and off that power switch and it does exactly the same thing. The inverter is also over here. I only have this pair of AC outlets, so there's 2 of them. I designed the build to run as much on DC as possible. So AC, I plug in my Starlink. I also have a rechargeable Dyson vacuum that I absolutely swear by in the van, and that charges on AC. A few other like little accessories and things need it, but for the most part, the van runs on DC. That includes my laptop, which is powered USB-C. It's a MacBook, and I can just plug that into a 12-volt socket as well. So that makes the system pretty efficient. I never ever worry about running out of power. It can be cloudy for days and days and days, and that's not really any sort of problem for me. The systems for the van are all run underneath my cabinets. And so there's the cabinetry you see, and then the little kickboard is recessed a little. And in that about 2.5-inch gap between the cupboards and the floor, I have false bottoms in my cabinets. And that is where all of the cabling is run. It's where the propane system is run, all of the water lines. And so if I have any issues with any of the systems, all I have to do is unload the stuff in the cabinet and then take out 3 or 4 screws and pop the bottom off the cabinet. And that gives me access to all of my cables, all of the water and whatnot. And so that's been really handy once or twice. I had the power to my fridge die, wasn't sure what was going on, and it ended up being a cable problem, and I had access to it just underneath the fridge by popping out the bottom of the cupboard. So you lose a little bit of space, but having that sort of access was wonderful because I didn't have to tear out my entire dresser unit to get 2 cables that were, in the wall of the van. And so it saved me heaps of time, and that's been just a really nice reassurance to have, knowing if I have a leak or anything like that, I can get to it and debug it relatively quickly. So this is my bedroom. The bed is about 5 feet edge to edge because it's so high. The van has started to curve in once we reach the mattress. So I'm about 5 feet. I have to sleep in it diagonally. Works fine for me. That's one of the really nice things about being small is this van fits me just right. Sleeping sideways, otherwise you'd have to be curled up pretty tightly. The mattress is a foam mattress, and so I just took a saw to it and cut it down to the appropriate size. It's a little bit wider than a twin, but far shorter than any other kind of adult bed. And underneath the bed here is some storage. So this is my shower basin. And then on one side I have my Starlink, the cell booster that I have not turned on since I got my Starlink. And then all of my laundry gets kind of shoved on the right-hand side. Completely underneath the bed is where I shove Dinah's dog bed during the daytime. At night, it comes out, it takes up my whole hallway here. And she was an addition to the van after I finished my build and was already on the road. I got her as a very small puppy, and she was kennel trained in the van. I put a baby gate underneath the bed to kind of block her in this garage area. And so I was, able to kennel train her, house train her in the van, have her confined when I need to go into a grocery store or something like that. She is far too big for that now, but it worked really, really well for a small dog. And I knew when I was doing my build that I wanted to get a dog. And so I designed that space with her in mind. Behind me is a massive air conditioning unit. This came with the van. It was all piped in. It only runs when the engine is running because it shares Freon lines with, the AC in the front of the van. And so it can be handy if the van gets really warm in the summers and I'm driving somewhere. It can cool things off pretty quickly, but it's not something that I can run independent of having the engine on. And so my plans are someday van upgrade to remove this unit entirely so I get a little tiny bit more headspace in my bedroom and can sit up and read a little bit more comfortably. One improvement to the bedroom that I've already made is adding a reading light here. So this does different colors of light, and it's on a really excellent dimmer switch. My house lights are on a light switch that's closer to the door, and so I can't turn them on and off from bed. And so the reading light came later once I realized I didn't want to have to read with a headlamp every night. And I was able to add it really easily because when I designed my electrical system, I left empty fuses everywhere. So I would be able to, add some cables and add lights or, other electronical components as I thought of them. Because I knew when I was doing my build and I hadn't lived in the van yet that I wasn't going to be able to think of absolutely everything. And that light is one of the examples of a thing I didn't think of, but was an improvement later on. We moved across the country back to my childhood home in Colorado, and in October we arrived. I started looking for vans immediately. I, ended my road trip in Colorado on a Saturday, and then I drove 5 hours up to Denver to check out my first rig the following day. It took me about 6 weeks to find this van, and I had some loose requirements in mind for this van. I knew that I would be working remotely full-time, and that I didn't want to feel like I was camping. I didn't want to feel like I was doing without. I really wanted to take everything that I love about homes and having a house and just minimize it. So that's why I have the oven and the running water and the sink and the hot water and those comforts that I do have, is because I was trying to just create a home, but a really little one. And so when I was looking for my rigs, I was looking for something that would be within my budget. I didn't want to have to pay a lot for this, because my plan was to live on the road for 1 year, find a place to live, and then settle down. And I didn't want to invest a lot of money in a fancy rig for this very short-term experiment. I wanted something that was low enough mileage I could trust it. I'm not a mechanic, and so I don't have the knowledge that it takes to fix things that could come up with an older rig. Could I get it? Absolutely. And now that I've built out this van from scratch, I know that I could absolutely learn how to do mechanical work on the van. I'm just not interested in it. And then I also wanted something that was a more modern year. She's a 2007. She is not a modern rig, but we can plug in, we can read codes. I can take this Econoline to pretty much any mechanic, and they've seen it. They know how to work on it. It's not going to be a long wait to get parts. And so it's a very serviceable van. This idea of functional requirements and, knowing what you need to function, what do you require for a system to do its job for you, was really important. And that's how I came about to the van that we're in now. All right, so this is transitioning into my kind of living space and my workspace. The desk is all stored back here along with my Reflectix, so I'm sorry if that is really loud. I've got a Lagoon table, and the mount is right here on the step, so nice and out of the way. There's a second mount here that I can set up to have a standing desk inside. I rarely do that, but it's nice to have the option, and the mount doesn't take up any space. And then this is my table. It's just a few pieces of ply that I laminated together, painted, and then I knew it would get really beat up being in the van, so I preempted it getting beat up by taking a sander to it and making it look beat up on its own. So this is what my workspace looks like. It also works really well for entertaining. I can sit somebody in this rotated chair here. I usually sit on the little bench seat. A third person can be here, but this van can fit up to 6-7 people pretty comfortably to hang out, because I don't have any overhead cabinets. And so the first thing a lot of people notice about the van is, even though she's pretty short on the inside, she's maybe 5'5", it still feels really open, really, really airy. Like you can pack a lot of people in here. And it's because I don't lose any space above to cabinetry. It's just all decoration. And then up top above my cockpit, this is all storage. It's a lot of books. And I also have an insulated blanket. It's just kind of on top of a shower curtain. So at night, for privacy, for insulation, I just drop that down on the shower curtain. Works really well. All right, this is the living space without the table. And this area has a few of my favorite parts of my build. I have a Nature's Head toilet. It's in this box, front and center here. And the front of the cupboards, it's just a mitered frame. And then I found silly wallpaper that made me happy and wallpapered the panel and then put a frame on it. So no painting. Eventually, I'd like to get artist friends to actually do art that's framed. But for now, it's the wallpaper. And instead of putting something on a slide, it's just an open the front, open the back. And that gives me access to the loo, which is really, really convenient. And then this box here is my favorite part of the build. So this is where I sit when I work, and I can lean against this counter extension here, or I can also put it up. I just use a chain and connect it up here, so nothing too fancy. You'll see that's where my hot water heater is. I have more fuses and charge ports here. Smoke and CO2 alarm, super important. But the box itself has a few different functions. It is where I store all of my cables and electronics, super easy access. But what's even better than that is this is my litter box. And so this bit lifts out here, and that gives us access to a litter box. And the best part about the litter box, and people ask me this all the time, is can you smell it? Doesn't it make a mess? And the litter box, her opening is just right here in the corner. So it's as close to outside in the doors as we can get it. In order to get in and out of the litter box, she has to step down onto the step before she can get back in the house. So there is never, ever any litter trapped in the house. It's nice and private for the cat. The dog can't get into it. And all I have to do is sweep off the step after she uses it. And with the configuration where it's placed, having that electronic shelf in here, I never ever notice or smell the litter box, which is really, really convenient for living with a cat in such a small space. This is the garage below my bed. It doesn't go as deep as some of the sides would lead you to believe because I have that inset where all of the dog stuff is. I started out with 4 Rubbermaids like this in back and have slowly minimized and minimized and minimized to just gain a little bit more space back. I try to travel with extra dog food, extra cat food, extra litter. Some of those things can be a little bit tricky to find on the road when I'm somewhere really, really remote. I can eat anything. I can, find something at a grocery store, but finding specifically the litter that the cat wants and will accept can be really difficult. So I try to have lots extra of that. And then on this side, to balance out the weight of the water tank, is where I have the inverter, those 300 amp hours of lithium ion. The solar charge controller is over here as well. And all of the electrical on one side, all of the water and plumbing on the other side, just to keep them separate, keep it simple. I was having a conversation really recently with a, woman, founder on Instagram, building out this kind of van. And she had a bunch of questions about building. And the best thing I could tell her, and the best thing I can tell anybody who is coming at this and maybe doesn't have the experience to feel confident about it, is there's no right way. There's no right way to build out a van. I've done it my way. It's really right for me because I thought about what my needs were and how to meet those needs. But I think that we see a lot of really, really beautiful builds now. We have, professional builders, companies, and even people who are hobbyists who build these gorgeous vans, and that is a way to do it, and it's beautiful. I love, scrolling them and seeing what people do, but there's not a right way. And, my van has, some rough spots. You can see the wiring harness and the metal next to me and whatnot. Like there's not the carpentry there, but there's no right way to do a van, which is advice I wish somebody had given me, so I would have spent a far, far less time trying to figure out how to make it look like everything I saw on the internet. Well, thank you all for watching. If you want to chat or follow me, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is mymeg, MYMEG.